Welcome to episode 2 of the EdUp Smart Space podcast. Hello, I'm Craig Park, your host. Today's theme is Engaging the Next Generation of Learners, the Role of Technology and Space Planning in K-12 and Higher Education Design. My guest today is Kate Portenier, Executive Director of Foundations for Adams Central Public Schools in Central Nebraska. Welcome to the program, Kate.
Thanks for having me, Craig. I'm happy to be here.
Kate, can you share a bit about your background in education and what led you to the role at the Foundations?
Sure. I have over 2 decades of classroom experience as a frontline teacher. It was in that role that I really learned that schools are a very impactful place. I taught family consumer science, which those courses are designed for really high level adaptive skilled learning for college and career readiness. What that means is they're extremely applicable, they're very collaborative, they're very hands on, teaching kids what they might want to know as they leave high school to help them really survive in the changing world. I've got 20 years of experience as a classroom teacher and then 2 years as an executive director for the Adams Central Schools Foundation. I have always had a heart for students and for learning, and my passion really has always been making education more accessible and even more engaging. I've been able to do that with the foundation as I move forward with large scale district projects along with our superintendent and our school board.
That's excellent. Thank you. How has your experience as a former educator shaped your views on learning environments and technology?
Oh, Craig, I've seen it all. I was around in education back when we used transparencies, if you can even remember that,
I
with the
told that
overhead
story in the
projector.
first podcast.
I remember the shift from more teacher driven technology, which is really in the realm of teachers being able to use more interactive facilitation like PowerPoints. And then I saw it move to one. I was on a strategic planning committee for a large public school district that helped implement the one initiative where each student had their own laptop and making that accessible and making sure that teachers, once they had the technology, really understood how to use it, because it's one thing to have the technology, it's another thing to be able to train the teachers in using it so it can be really impactful and engaging for kids. I've seen how engaged students have become when they have more hands-on collaborative and tech supported learning environments. It's been a lot of fun. I think there's really still more to learn. It's definitely not over yet.
Absolutely. You and I got to meet a couple of years ago in Orlando at Infocom, which I thought was a real eye opener to the sort of the scale of all of the audiovisual segment of technology available to educators. What are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in student expectations regarding technology and learning spaces over the past decade?
That's a great question. I really do feel strongly about the fact that students now almost expect learning to be interactive and they expect it to be immediate. Students' mindset has changed because that's what they're used to in the outside world. They're already in these environments where they're able to access digital tools at a really young age. And so, if the classroom and the school is not keeping up with that technology, it's incredibly challenging to continue to engage those students. I really feel like gone are the days of the classroom where you had a row of desks and a board, or at least they should be. I've been in 5 public high schools, and I would say that they're all a little bit different. They all have a different culture or theory of how they want to engage their students. But at the end of the day, if we aren't engaging them in really interactive, collaborative settings starting at a young age, they thrive on having a lot of flexibility and choice. So when you're a teacher, you have varying levels of degrees of students' learning abilities. And in education, we call that differentiation. So, how can you differentiate your instruction for 24 different students in your classroom at the same time? That's incredibly challenging because teachers are already trying to do a lot. So, now you're telling teachers you have to differentiate your instruction to 24 different learners. What I have seen as the benefit, and I can attest to this personally in the classroom, is technology allows the teacher to really utilize that engagement seamlessly because it's easy for them to be able to differentiate assignments and give students choice and how they want to interact with the content. It's been a real game changer in terms of differentiation.
I remember when my daughter was first in school and I got onto a technology planning committee for our school district. There was a new program in the California system called developmentally appropriate curricula, where that differentiation was applied in the classroom. We developed a system that where the teachers could record a student doing a project like reading or working on something, and then that DVD would pass on from
Mhm.
class to class or year to year, so each teacher could see the previous years where that student was and adjust their teaching appropriately. I think that customization now is going to be required as we go forward, and makes puts a lot more pressure on the faculty to do more engagement. What are the defining characteristics of the next generation that you're seeing that are about to enter higher education?
Craig, they are incredibly tech savvy. Again, I'm just going to reiterate that. They can pick up on skills quickly, and they're not afraid to teach themselves in order to learn really rapidly. The other thing that I find really, really interesting as zoom out of 20 years is how the technology has really changed the way that students work together and collaborate, which is a really important transferable skill. So whether it's in your industry, in any industry, healthcare, it doesn't matter. Collaboration is something that is such a valuable skill for any workforce that it needs to really be on the forefront of people's mind. How are we continuing to make sure that these students can collaborate really well? I feel like technology has shifted that in a very positive way for students. I look at my own kids, Craig, they're young. I've got a fifth and a sixth grader. When I think of collaboration, I don't just think of necessarily teamwork, although that's a big part of it, but they're engaging their friends constantly. So whether it's through FaceTime with their phone, they are engaging that area of their life constantly. They're connected always. Good or bad, right or wrong,
Right.
it's what we're facing right now is they're incredibly connected, and it can breed really positive things because it breeds a lot of collaboration, and it makes them be able to adapt to different technology.
How does that the way that these students are learning and collaborating shape the kind of spaces they expect to see when they're in college and beyond?
But whenever I think of what I was saying before with working in groups, they're moving between physical and digital spaces really seamlessly, or they should be. That would be the goal. You still want to have those face to face interactions that are more physical. We still need those physical connections of our life. I do think they should be able to move between those spaces seamlessly because they like to have a lot of control over their learning space. So flexibility is key. I was just telling somebody this morning, there are two things that you need to have to be a really good educator. And these are probably true for any area. The first thing you need to have is patience. And the second thing that you need to have is flexibility. If you can have those two qualities, you're going to be successful. When we run into different hangups or if something doesn't work, are they able to adapt and are they able to pivot? Are they able to go with plan B? It's a skill that we really need to make sure we're developing in our students that they're patient when things don't go correctly, but they're also able to adapt and be flexible. I think when you're looking at ways the spaces shape how they expect to be in college, sometimes I do think higher education does a better job of that than K-12. They just seem to be on the forefront. K-12 really does need to take it really seriously because they're doing their students a disservice if they're not preparing them to enter that type of learning environment. They're going to be behind. I would say that people have got to pay attention with how they are designing their engagement strategies with these classrooms of students.
So that plays into the next question is what role does the technology play in keeping the students engaged in the classroom? You talked earlier about sort of the traditional didactic presenter at the front of the room, screens or whiteboards, and how that shifted now to screens at team tables in more active learning classrooms. What other technologies have you seen used to increase engagement?
Well, there is a lot of gamification right now in education because students are used to that in their outside world. When we bring it into education, it's a really seamless way for them to be able to continue that engagement with the students because it's something that they like. But the lower level, I'm thinking a lot of gamification. We see a lot of that with interactive learning. So spaces that need to be designed and built for that. The other thing that I think when you're talking about engaging students, the more you can make it real world hands on. I'll just give you a small example. When part of my role at the foundation is that I get to engage alumni, they're from all over the world. These people in central Nebraska, they graduate and then they get dispersed all over the world. I just met a former alum from Dubai. He was in the oil and gas industry. We have a class that is called the Jumpstart class where students are learning about careers and they're learning about different opportunities. How do I get this alum that lives in Pennsylvania to talk to the students in the central Nebraska about his experience in Dubai? Technology plays an incredibly powerful role in that because things like the video interaction, Zoom, real time students being able to ask questions. I think the more that you can connect students with the outside world, especially where we are, Craig, we're in rural Nebraska. The district that I'm in now is what I would consider small, which means that what they're exposed to is limited. When you're able to design spaces that motivate and engage students with seeing the bigger picture for the outside world, it's incredibly powerful. Another example I have is when I was teaching, I taught some really fun classes. I taught foods and nutrition, and one of the classes that I taught was cultural foods. Now, Craig, we're in central Nebraska. You know that these students are really familiar with beef and potatoes and corn. So, how was I attempting to engage them in the content that had to do with Central American food or Latin America or different areas of the world? I would have them go and walk through that country interactively online. We, at that time, used Google Maps and we would drop our character. I would try to immerse the students into walking around where they could. What are you seeing? So the more you can create an experience, right? You hear a lot about that in education. If you can create an experience for a student, they will remember it 1,000 times over. That's really, really powerful.
I mentioned in the previous podcast the book Ready Player One, which was made into a movie. It's science fiction. There's a scene where there was a group of 24 students in a classroom, all wearing VR headsets, and they're traveling
Right.
through Paris, doing exactly what you just described. What I think the next generation of engaging technology for classrooms is AR and VR. Have you started to see any applications of virtual reality or augmented reality in your school?
In our school, we were able to get a grant a couple years ago with Z Space. Z Space is interactive technology that was used primarily in our science departments. We have a pretty small school. Some of the limitations that smaller schools have is they have less teachers. So they're not able to teach as many different variety of courses, and that can be limiting. How do we still give students the opportunity when we do have constraints as far as staff? Maybe we can't offer 16 different science classes like a large high school would, but what can we do to bridge those gaps? We applied for a grant and we were granted Z Space technology, which is interactive technology that has a wide variety of modules. One module had to do with anatomy and physiology when the science teacher was teaching A and P, and they were able to go in there and essentially dissect a cadaver and pieces of the heart. I was able to see it in action and see these students work on it collaboratively because they would work on it together. What it really does is it gives students more opportunity. We're also seeing similar technology to those modules in some of our career and technical education programs. So, career and technical education, it's at the forefront of a lot of people's mind right now because it is what feeds a lot of H3 jobs, high demand, high wage, high skill. There's a profound worker shortage right now for those. We're thinking of careers like HVAC, plumbing, electrical wiring. you're going to see more career and technical education bringing in that those modules that are showing students this is how you can repair a small engine. Because honestly, it's more cost effective to purchase those modules than it would be to bring in 16 different small engines. And you're still offering that student the learning opportunity, even though you might not have a teacher that actually can teach that content. And Craig, this makes me think of something different that I think is important to note here with how education really has changed. When I first started teaching, I was the expert on all the content. I'm going to give you an example. I taught focaccia bread. Have you ever had focaccia bread? It's really good. It's one of my favorites. With the internet and being able to have students have a device that could tell them everything they could know ever about focaccia bread, more so than myself. That is when my philosophy of technology and education changed. I was no longer considered the expert in this content area because these students could actually learn more about bread from the small device that they had in their hand more than I could. So the philosophy for me has really changed in the fact that I'm really just a facilitator. And facilitators teach any content. They're guiding the curiosity, they're guiding the learning. I think you're going to see that teachers' role is no longer the content expert, but they begin to be really good at helping students be curious and facilitate the information. I think you're going to see a big shift in that with the introduction of AI and making sure students are able to navigate those changing waters or they're going to be behind.
Absolutely. It's over the last decade, we've seen a shift in higher education towards what's I've heard this phrase often from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, which is exactly what you just described. I'm thinking about a project that for the listeners, you should know Kate's husband, Jeff, and I work together at Clark and Anderson Architects and Engineers, Lincoln, Nebraska. There's no free plug. We're currently working on the Global Center for Grain and Food Innovation at Kansas State University. I'm thinking about your focaccia bed story, and I'm betting that that happens all the time now, or will happen when the building is complete, because it's specifically designed to engage the next generation of people thinking about the foods we eat and how we make them, from growing to processing to making in all the labs and facilities in this building. There's a real linear line between what you were teaching in Adams Central in the basics of food groups to what students could learn if they find that passion for food at K-State as a career path into higher education. Which leads to my next question. What are the most common gaps you're hearing about how K-12 students are learning and how the college environments are designed?
I think one thing is there are still college spaces that are designing for passive learning. That's how I would explain it. That's where you see the lecture hall, the fixed seating, areas where there's probably minimal space for collaboration. There are some that just can't get away from that. But K-12 students are becoming a lot more used to tech rich environments. So there could be a disconnect. I know that we have this a unique project that I've had a chance to work on for the school district. We just installed 30-foot interactive digital media boards out on our football field and our gym. The foundation helped facilitate that project. The reason that we wanted the project is because we believe so strongly in hands-on learning for students. That project was not necessarily about creating a really cool game time experience, although that happened. It was about the students creating these graphics, and the students run the video board, they create the content, they create the graphics, they actually work with community businesses. It's really quite remarkable. I just talked to one of the students that's worked on it for 2 years, and I said, Tessa, what can you actually tell me about what you've learned? She said, the number one thing I learned is time management. I don't know about you, Craig, but I feel like that is a transferable skill if I've ever seen one, because what was happening is her assignments were being displayed for thousands of people on a Friday night. She didn't have the option to turn it in late. I think that that is where learning should be going and where it should be headed. And I think it is headed that way. But sometimes I do think about those students that are playing football on our field that have this completely interactive game time experience that's very heavy audio visual, even including lights, sound, everything. They might go to a college and play football at a stadium that doesn't have that technology. That's one where I've thought, oh gosh, the kids here that graduate are going to be profoundly disappointed if they're moving on to some of these stadiums that really don't have this. So that's been an interesting, unique thing that I've learned about the disconnect with students, that could be entering college here soon.
I think that that same thing is happening in the classroom that you just described happening out on the field. We see that there's not a digital equity of same facilities. Even on a given campus, you may have facilities that are 10 years old and simply don't have the operational funding to keep them updated to the latest ones when a new building got open and it's got all the cool tools. Classes that are held in those older classrooms are like you got sent to the back of the room so
Right.
I think the challenge for both universities, colleges, and to a great extent K-12 districts too, is keeping up with the rapid change of technologies. Do you have any sort of process within the Adams Central for sandbox spaces or creative spaces where you can play with new technologies?
We do. We have people that come in so the teachers could utilize and get some hands-on experience with different technology.
So, from your perspective, what are the biggest mistakes that schools and universities are making when designing new learning spaces? You've addressed this before, but I think it's recognizing the shifting expectation of the student.
Exactly. I would say that you nailed it. I think one of the biggest mistakes in designing spaces right now could be not actually having student input. It's one thing to have teacher input, people do that a lot. But the student is the one that's engaged in the learning environment really heavily. And so I think that it could be a pretty big mistake for either K-12 or universities to start designing spaces when they don't actually have the students' input. I hate to say it, Craig, but as much as I am updated on technology, the students still generally know more than I do. It reminds me of almost any project that you might be trying to gain buy in for. I really think it's important that you actually start with the people that are going to be impacted the most, which would be the students. So when you gain student input like that, and next I would even say would be even teacher input, the people that are going to be implementing, because as you and I both know, the last thing that you want to do is create these great spaces and have this technology and then not invest in proper training or integration for your teachers. That could go south pretty quickly. So I would say that I do wish that there would be more collaboration with students with their input on what they would like to see, because they're going to tell you it might be things that we didn't even think of.
Absolutely. And I know that we've seen in our own programming effort that first phase that architects use in terms of gathering information about a new building. After buildings are identified based on growth of a particular curriculum or demographic growth, that drives a demand for new space. Then they hire the architect based on a conceptual idea of what that building needs to be. And we sit down, we engage as much as we can, but it's often difficult to get the voice of the customer or the voice of the client in the room because of conflicting schedules and access. I know every project I've ever worked on that includes not only the facilities people and operational people that will run the building afterwards, but the students and faculty will work and live in that building where they're part of the voice that helps the architects understand the vision for the project. The projects come out better.
Craig, I'd like to add one more thing, and it made me think about my own personal experience as you were talking. I've got to tell you, and I'm just going to be honest and be vulnerable with my experience, because I came into a public school that had a $400,000 remodel for just my one family consumer science classroom. It was very exciting. They completely remodeled the entire room. It was very industry grade as far as equipment for maybe food service and restaurant management. However, the technology was a complete afterthought, a complete and utter afterthought. So here they had this great, incredible remodel. And we all know that a lot of times facilities drive, I would say, the engagement with the students, particularly in career and technical education. The facilities are going to drive those programs. So here they have this great room. I was really excited about it. I get in there, complete and utter afterthought. So I have this sparkling shiny brand new room, and they're having to, I kid you not, put a projector on a piece of plywood and hang it from the ceiling. I about fell over. I think that that is one mistake that I for sure have seen in K-12 education, is not really making sure that we have all the accurate information from the experts and how they can help to facilitate learning. One thing that I think of often is just the simple fact of confidence screens. You have schools that are not putting in confidence screens, either for their teachers or for their students. That is crazy. I just gave a presentation this morning in a room that I was in. It did not have a confidence screen. I knew my presentation, but I can't tell you how much it would have actually given me a little bit of a boost in confidence, literally, to have that there. That is a huge misstep in K-12 education right now, that people are not implementing those confidence screens. They're doing their students and their teachers a pretty big disservice.
I agree. And I certainly agree on the importance of early inclusion of technology in that planning and design process. It was, in fact, the theme of the previous podcast. So I'll tell you again why it's important. I'm betting that we'll hear that throughout the series as I talk to more and more educators and CIOs and other folks involved in education, both at the K 12 and the higher ed level.
Craig, I've seen how impactful the lack of technology can be on direct instruction. It can be a major hangup when students are trying to learn, when teachers are trying to teach. The lack of planning can be incredibly disruptive to the actual instruction. Whenever somebody's having a problem with technology, if it impacts direct instruction, it's the top of the list. If there's an issue, let's say with a projector or sound or whatnot, that impacts the learning immediately. So you can't ignore it. You can't ignore it because that's what everybody's there for.
Another area I wanted to discuss was the current generation, at least the ones that I'm engaging with, are much more concerned about the environment and sustainability, energy management, and energy usage. What role does sustainability play in the next generation of school and campus planning from your experience with your students? Do you see that same passion for the earth that we're seeing in our building?
I really do. I think that people are being more mindful of that on all levels. I do think it's happening for a couple different reasons. I know from even the standpoint of our superintendents in the public schools are having to make decisions and choices on how to reduce energy. They're all working under the same budget. A lot of time people think that school districts are like any other entity. When costs rise for everybody, they rise for public schools too. So they have to get a little bit smart about what are they doing to be energy efficient with their building. That might be designing spaces with different lighting and those types of things. The other thing that I really think that schools are starting to do more of, at least in my experience, has been, when you think of sustainability, not necessarily just environmentally friendly, but also creating spaces that are adaptable. I'm thinking about the size of school that I'm in currently and making sure that the sustainability piece means that the classroom can be used for multi-purposes. So the choir room can serve as also a large scale public room for the community to come in and facilitate different types of instruction. So yes, sustainability would include being more energy efficient, being mindful of those types of things, but it really goes back to these adaptable spaces, because those are sustainable, that we can utilize and be flexible for other things.
Excellent. So in the concluding section, look ahead. I titled this "What Comes After, What Comes Next." So now you get to be a science fiction author based on your 20 years looking backwards. Look ahead 5 to 10 years, and what do you think the biggest changes we'll see in how students learn and how schools are being designed?
Oh, Craig, it's got to be AI. I mean, AI driven personalization, augmented reality. We're seeing people are dipping their toe in the water, as I would say, with things like Z spaces. I think that you're really going to see it change because education is really about providing students with opportunity. That's the job of educators. Educators, whether it's a superintendent, a school board member, a classroom teacher, they're in the business of providing students with opportunities. And those opportunities help that student grow and learn and develop, and also develop critical thinking skills. So if a school has an aversion to AI, I would be terrified because those students are going to be behind. We have a generation of some people in education that are like, no, no, no AI. They think that that's somehow cheating. I would say, boy, are they wrong. You're going to be 10 steps behind if you're not on board with AI. When I think about the future, when I think about 10 years ahead, how are students going to learn? It's going to be AI driven. It's going to be a lot more personalization, which leads back to differentiation and what those students get to pick. Because we all know when there's choice involved, people are more empowered. I'm going to take this initiative because this is what I want to learn about. We are the same way. So I think you're going to see a lot more integration with AI. And then once you have understanding of augmented reality, that is going to breed this transfer of how these spaces are designed, because they have to be fully adaptable. They've got to be more fluid and more flexible.
What one piece of advice would you give educators and administrators looking to future proof their learning space?
I think it goes back to the first two things I said about having to be a good educator. You need two things. The first is patience, the second
Yep.
is flexibility. My advice would be you've got to design with flexibility in mind. The best learning environments really aren't tied to a single teaching style or a single teaching content, because, like we both just said, teachers are the tour guide. With flexible learning in mind, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot if they're not starting to look at how can this space be flexible for all levels and sizes of school districts. From the smallest to the largest, you're going to be able to adapt to the changing landscape that your students are encountering, or the different things that the teachers are encountering.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kate. This was very insightful and personal. You share a lot from a district that is small but mighty. Those of you who open up Google Maps and look for the Adams Central School District, you'll find it almost dead center in the middle of the United States. It's a lovely area. This has been a great experience getting to talk to you, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy this podcast as well. Thanks very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the EdUp Smart Space podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow us on Spotify or your other podcast channels. Special thanks go to my colleagues at the EdUp Experience Network. Check out the other shows in the series at edupexperience.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Craig Park. Let's keep building smarter spaces together.